There's Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's old partner who just passed away. He had a great line. It was sort of a joke he was giving about a young Mozart was at a cocktail party. And a man in his 20s came up to him and said, Herr Mozart, I'm looking to write my first symphony. Do you have any advice? And Mozart turned around and said, yeah, you're not ready to write a symphony yet. And the guy looked at Mozart. He said, but Mozart, you wrote your first symphony when you were 4 or whatever it was. And Mozart turned around and looked at him and said, yeah, but I wasn't asking anybody how to do it. And so I have a lot of these conversations with people who want to understand if there's some kind of, I don't know, magic formula or magic set of indicators that comes down that says you should do this. Look, an overwhelming majority of these things fail. Even if you can scale them past product market fit and build some initial traction with revenue, the majority of them still fail. You have to be kind of nuts to do this, but you either just know it's something you want to do and nothing's going to get in your way, or you don't.
Welcome back to another episode of What Worked. Mike, keep me honest here. I feel like this is episode lucky number 10.
10,
no idea.
Double digits.
10, yes.
I'm good with 10.
10. So 10 it is. For this special episode, I am excited to bring in a guy that I've known for a very long time, and it's cool to see someone else from my past be just crazy enough to do this whole startup thing. We've got Ethan Garonzik, which, Ethan, do you want to hit a quick tune here? I'm thinking key of C, la 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 la. Just kidding. You were
I don't know if we need to grace the internet with that.
So, yeah, I'll give the personal side, and then Ethan, you can talk about the professional side. I'm sure you don't want to start singing, but I went to boarding school, a school called Deerfield Academy. Funny enough, Ethan, I feel like I never talk about it, especially living on the West Coast, where people think boarding schools are for really bad kids. You're either Harry Potter or you tried to burn your parents' house down. I don't think either one of us are wizards or burned houses down, but we did both go to Deerfield Academy, and Ethan and I met there, and then we were also in the little joke there, inside joke. We were in an a cappella group, which was, I don't know if it was cool back then, maybe semi-cool. It seems to be cooler now because of what's that? Keep me honest here, Mike. What's that one movie? I forget.
High School Musical.
No,
that's what I was thinking. You guys were in High School Musical.
No, dude. What's the one? Forget. It's got Anna Kendrick in it.
The other acapella. My acapella library of content.
Come
isn't
on,
that deep,
bro.
So.
It's got some excuse me. Don't they say that? I think that's one of the jokes. Anyway, so yeah, acapella probably still isn't that cool. But Ethan and I were in an acapella group together. And we recently reconnected. Funny enough, we were kind of sharing some war stories about both being crazy enough to start startups. But he is the founder of a company called Vendori, and we're excited to have him on and tell his story. And also, all three of us are parents of very, very young kids. So we're going to be talking about what we don't really know anything about, which is parenting as well. But yeah, Ethan, if you don't mind giving a quick introduction, telling us a little bit about Vendori, what it is you guys do, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Tyler. Leave the past in the past and focus on the present here. It's been great to reconnect with you and get to meet Mike, and thrilled to be on today and share some of the insights and mistakes that we've made over the past couple of years. So I founded Vendori about 2.5 years ago. We're an enterprise SaaS application, so business software focused on the CPQ space. It stands for Configure, Price, Quote. And at a high level, what we do is we inject control and velocity into our customers' B2B transactions through our no-code platform and really deliver an enterprise-quality deal-making experience at startup prices. So we can go from there, but this is a world I've been living in for a while. This whole concept of numbers meets sales meets operations and turning that into a no-code platform for the future.
Yeah, awesome. And you're hitting on a lot of course, popular buzzwords right now with no code, low code. But what I will just point out for anybody who is listening, who's maybe less familiar with the problem, I think that a lot of people at their company, I'll take Hireframe for example, our pricing is relatively simple, even though sometimes we tend to make it a little bit more complex than that. But we ultimately offer kind of, one service, there is some kind of customization to it. I think this world that you come from, which is like enterprise solutions with lots of different pricing options, would you mind kind of sharing a little bit about what the problem really is and who your core customer is?
Yeah, of course. So sales and B2B sales has changed a lot over the past 10 years. It used to be very heavily driven by a few senior account executives or sales reps, moved into more of this concept of SDRs and outbound lead generation, and then sort of transformed a bit into this concept of product-led growth as well. And so where you see solutions that can be sold off the website, something like an Asana or a Monday.com, there's a very well-established set of tools out there in the market that allows startups and sort of rapidly growing smaller businesses to build a sophisticated IT stack. Where that starts to break is once you start crossing a few million of ARR. And to your point, Tyler, once you're building a product catalog, complex pricing models, tiered pricing, volume pricing, you're looking at things like managing ongoing subscriptions, so upgrading to new service levels or adding new licenses in the middle of a subscription term. That's really where we shine. And so we really specialize in those complex pricing catalogs, those complex go-to-market motions, and the structuring of those complex deals, where a lot of sort of the core startup and SMB tools really fall short.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm nodding my head here because I'm relating. You mentioned a lot of this kind of lived within a few account executives and SDRs and that sort of thing. I'm relating this to my days as a quota carrying salesperson, and a couple things come to mind because I know you experienced this. One is I love the days of when our pricing wasn't really that watched over or sophisticated, because as an opportunistic salesperson, I could get away with a lot more. Basically just get the deal done. And I remember when we brought in some, red tape, if you will, and, we basically had like a deal desk, which I think you kind of sat in on. And I'm curious what your experience was. I've had the experience of a salesperson who felt like he was always pleading his case. Maybe you were on the other side. You were kind of judge and jury.
I was. You were my least favorite customer back then.
I was
No,
going to say.
it was a great way to learn about the problem, though, because everyone's frustrated with the way things are done today. So to your point, Tyler, salespeople are very frustrated that they don't have transparency into things like discounting limits and what they can sell, configurations of product. There were a lot of situations where a sales rep would come in and try to configure their quote. They would hit submit for approval internally. It would disappear into the ether, as they called it. And 3 weeks later, they'd get an email saying, sorry, you have the wrong things on this quote. No real guidance, and again, certainly no upfront communication. And as you know, as a sales guy, time kills all deals.
Totally.
We used to roll out something like a 75 to 100-page field manual every year that we would give to the sales folks. It would have all the things you were supposed to sell, all the motions you were supposed to go through, the new products, the engineering roadmap. And in the back were the 2 pages that every sales rep turned to immediately, and it was, how do I retire my quota? And that's what they were focused on. But all of the sort of corporate policies, the pricing rules, the regulations, those would all get completely lost in the wind. And so we found that just by injecting those into a platform, when you as a salesperson would go in to structure your deal, if we can embed those rules in a way that you get real-time feedback around what you're supposed to be selling, how you're supposed to be selling it, and what you're supposed to be selling it for, it saves you a lot of time. It really preserves a lot of that gross margin for the company, so you don't get into those internal discount negotiations that you were talking about, Tyler. And so again, getting back to this concept of injecting control and velocity, that's really what Vendori seeks to do broadly across an entire company's go-to-market process.
Yeah, totally. And I'm again, just relating. I remember I got access directly to the pricing model, and to your point, once I had that access and I kind of understood how to do it, that sort of self-help, solution was incredible, because I started to understand what the impact was of different, parts of the model on gross margin, and I knew what I could kind of manipulate, and basically it really helped. It helped all parties. I would go, typically to court with a much better case, and most importantly, I would use the ultimate. For us, it was all about that gross margin target. That was really helpful, but that ability to do it myself, I hated the black box days. That was really frustrating. As a salesperson, would make me want to quit.
Well, I think you touched on something really important. It has to do with how we explain what Vendori does to our customers and users. And it's this concept of enablement. There are a lot of platforms out there today that are looking to replace a function or say, we can do your job better than you. And that's really not what Vendori is about. It's about enabling salespeople to sell better deals, enabling rev ops and sales ops and finance folks to manage their business better. Not saying we're going to take you out of the equation, but simply helping them with a lot of that administrative work, the manual reconciliations of bad data flowing through a stack that take up their time, so they can focus on the more strategic, important elements of their jobs.
Yeah. And Ethan, you mentioned that you started Vendori 2.5 years ago, but it's very clear that you've been working on this problem for a much longer time. Could you
Right.
give us the background of how you even discovered this problem that you're now working day in and day out to solve?
Sure, it's a great question. I think it speaks a bit to how we talk about the founding of Vendori as a problem that was born from frustration. This was not four folks sitting around a dorm room with an idea to change the world. Our entire team is built up of people who have lived this from all angles, understand the pain points, and really get the problem that we're trying to solve. I've done pretty much everything at tech companies with the exception of writing code or carrying a sales bag as an individual contributor salesperson. And so most recently, I spent time at SAP, the big German ERP company, and then Citrix, sort of the enterprise virtual networking business here in the States, and held a number of roles across finance, sales ops, rev ops, deal desk, pricing. And some themes that were consistent between both of those, one was really around price discipline. And so when you're an enterprise and you have a massive book of business, you get a lot of data to analyze. We noticed that we would sell to one company in an industry for 2 to 3 times what we would sell to their competitor in the same industry for. And it had nothing to do with the dynamics of the deal. It had to do with the dynamics of the sales team and the fact that that salesperson was usually better at negotiating internally, or there was always sort of some hook as to why they needed to lead with a discount-based approach instead of really focusing on selling the value. And we had an outdated tech stack most recently at Citrix. So as I was sitting over the global pricing team for the company, it was about $3 billion in revenue across, we really sold about 5 or 6 main things, 16,000 SKUs. Pricing was all over the place. And a lot of the reason why and why I was brought in was to facilitate this digital transformation. So Citrix had historically been an on-premise legacy business. All of the systems, all of the back office stack was designed around this concept of on-prem, where you sell an entitlement to the license and then you sell some ongoing component of software maintenance. When we transformed the business model into a subscription-based SaaS platform and really changed those pricing characteristics, it absolutely broke everything on the back end. So very much trying to jam the square into the round hole. And we just realized that the way we were doing business had changed, but our systems weren't keeping up. There was nothing fundamentally complex about the operations we were doing. They just didn't work with the systems we'd had in place for 25 or 30 years. And so I'd sat over the procurement process for this new CPQ software and realized that the only incumbents out there, they would effectively sell you a basic on-your-desk calculator. And they'd tell you about all the things they could make it do for you, but they needed 18 to 24 months to come in and custom design the solution. So at the core of what we do, there's no incredibly complex or black box math. I mean, they're very basic operations. It's just an understanding of kind of all of the nuance around how it comes together to make sure that your sales reps don't need to wait 3+ weeks to get a quote out the door, to make sure that you have some standardization in pricing, you're preserving gross margins, and that the people who are responsible for keeping the business running aren't always behind the ball. Because if you're relying on a consulting estimate 2 years out, well, your business is going to change between now and then. And so it's critical that you have the ability to stay on top of what you're doing today, and even better to think ahead about where you want to be in 18 months as opposed to constantly chasing that tail.
Yeah, you mentioned like every company has like their processes and they change. Is that part of the reason, like the no code nature of Vendori, is that part of it where it's you're a product that's easy to configure for each customer in their for their unique needs?
Yeah, very, very much. That's a great question. So the no-code bit comes into 2 places. One is sort of that initial configuration or implementation, that we don't require the 18 to 24 months of consulting and the cost that comes with that. So our software can now approach the SMB and startup segments of the market without necessarily needing to, again, rely on this army
Got
of
it.
outsourced consultants. But the phrase we use internally is enable the business owner to run the business. I remember our CEO at Citrix came to me and asked if he could have a report every time a deal over $1 million was sent out the door in APJ. The only way to do that was to go to our IT team, who looked at me like I was crazy and said, maybe we can get to that in 6 months. We already have a backlog. And just thought there has to be a better way to do this. And so getting back to this no-code concept, it lets the folks who are in charge of running the business actually run the business and keeps IT really focused on access and security.
Did you also use, call it, external outsourced devs when you built, kind of like version 1 of Vendori?
We did. And so my approach initially, especially to get the MVP up, not having a technical or engineering background, and I actually realized as I was going through my LinkedIn of folks that I'd want to do this with, when you spend your life in sales and finance and operations, it's amazing the sort of wall that comes up. And I just didn't have the relationships and the network on the engineering side.
Sure.
So I reached out. I had very clear, specific guidelines. We had clear budget. We knew where we wanted to go. So this wasn't sort of a napkin drawing session that I handed off. It was much more prescriptive, but it was going to be much more cost efficient for me and a better way to manage the risk of building something that we didn't know how it was going to be received by the market, to get that off the ground with an external or outsourced dev shop at first. So we spent about the first year building with the outsourced dev before we started to bring things in-house.
Yeah. Ethan, could you share some learnings that you've acquired, working with outsourced dev shops, both like in your corporate role, but also as the founder of Vendori? I think there's a lot of people who are interested in perhaps building a product who aren't technical. They've heard probably a lot of bad things about working with outsourced dev shops, a lot of war stories. What could you share about your experience? Maybe some tips or tricks of working with outsourced dev shops.
How much time do you have, Mike? We can talk about this for a while. One, it's critical that you trust the people that you're working with and that you have some way of evaluating their capacity and capabilities. If you're entirely non-technical, you need somebody who can speak your language, understand the business implications of what you're doing, and translate that into technical output. They need to do that in a way that is scalable. They need to do it in a way that can ultimately be taken over by an in-house team, because you're not going to run with outsourced devs forever. But really the core of that is trust. And the situations where I've really seen that structure and that partnership break down is usually where you have an entirely technical side, but absolutely no ability to communicate at a shared level with a non-technical founder, or just where there isn't that element of trust. And I've heard, as I'm sure you guys have, sort of plenty of shady stories about either quality of work or sort of shells and frames going up without the underlying stack and substance. So I guess the first thing is make sure you really trust these people, because they're building your entire product. And if they don't build it well, you're going to either have to start again, or you're going to end up just putting a bunch of time and resources into a product that's not scalable or sellable.
Yeah,
absolutely.
No, trust is huge. And yeah, I think like having a way to really know, to speak the same language, I think, about like capacity, bandwidth, productivity is super critical. Ethan, Tyler, I was wondering if we could take a step back here, because I'm super curious about, you had this challenge or this problem you identified at Citrix, and then you made a big leap. You're like, hey, this is a business, and I'm the person to start this business. I think there are a lot of people that are currently working in various roles that are sitting on ideas, really letting them marinate. But it's a huge step to take that leap and actually start the business. I'm curious to know just, well, what were you thinking? How did you ultimately make that decision to start a business to solve this problem?
I've always been a fairly restless person, and so when I see things that aren't working that I think I can help solve, I've always liked to be hands-on, even when that was, in the context of being an employee at a larger firm. It's why I, for example, tried to take the initiative to build some of these tools internally. I don't think I would have done this if I hadn't been able to build something and see its effectiveness and sort of test the hypothesis. It's an expensive, it's a harrowing, and it's a draining process to go out on your own. It very much helps if you can balance that out with other people who understand the problem and bring things into the equation and are willing to work with you. But there's Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's old partner, who just passed away. He had a great line. It was sort of a joke he was giving about a young Mozart was at a cocktail party. And a man in his 20s came up to him and said, "Herr Mozart, I'm looking to write my first symphony. Do you have any advice?" And Mozart turned around and said, "Yeah, you're not ready to write a symphony yet." And the guy looked at Mozart. He said, but Mozart, you wrote your first symphony when you were 4 or whatever it was. And Mozart turned around and looked at him and said, "Yeah, but I wasn't asking anybody how to do it." And so I have a lot of these conversations with people who want to understand if there's some kind of, I don't know, magic formula or magic set of indicators that comes down that says you should do this. Look, an overwhelming majority of these things fail. Even if you can scale them past product market fit and build some initial traction with revenue, the majority of them still fail. You have to be kind of nuts to do this, but you either just know it's something you want to do and nothing's going to get in your way, or you don't. But at no point has sort of an angel floated down and said, this is going to work, or I think you should do this. It's an awful lot of risk, and you just have to be willing to go to the mat every day to take that passion for the problem you're trying to solve and really hit it.
So Ethan, when you took the leap, it was you just had to get started, right? If I were an investor, I'd be curious. I know that YC is famous for really, looking for co-founders. And if you're like the business co-founder, they really want you to partner with someone technical. Can you share with us how you overcame, being a business, the business founder without a technical co-founder?
It was rocky and not ideal. And actually, to sort of answer your question indirectly, if I could do it in retrospect, and I, for example, knew our CTO today, who's now in-house, I would be much more comfortable doing this with a technical co-founder. I think that brings a lot to the table. And again, we talked about what that co-founder needs to have in terms of being able to speak the business language and understand the problem. Transitioning from an outsourced dev shop to an internal engineering function has definitely been a challenge for us. I think that was probably the biggest hurdle that we've faced, and it consumed a lot of 2023 for us. You need somebody who gets the vision today and for the future. Otherwise, to your point, Mike, you end up accumulating a lot of tech debt. And so again, in retrospect, I wish I'd done it with a technical co-founder. I didn't have the resources or the experience at the time. But the way we operate today is much smoother and much more efficient than we were with outsourced devs. And that transition of a code base from one shop to another, even as you're just growing an in-house team, you have to start committing resources to things like onboarding, technical documentation, and just how you build tends to need to be a little bit more organized and structured. So you're constantly balancing the need to get a product out quickly, test that product market fit, and bring on early customers. For something like ours, which is very sort of data heavy, enterprise heavy application, it has to be very scalable and has to be very dependable. So again, you're constantly balancing the two of those. But in retrospect, I would highly suggest that if someone's non-technical, that they find a technical co-founder that, if they can, whom they trust and who understands the business vision.
I'm going to stay on theme here. You mentioned doing this transition and building out your team in-house. You, not here, but in our past conversation, you mentioned some learnings that you had in terms of recruiting your team. And I'd love for you to share those. As a fellow founder, a lot of it resonated and I learned a lot from it. So kind of what have you learned in your time of building your own team in-house?
Yeah, so I think a lot of these lessons probably apply across functions. So again, not being technical, how do you evaluate your first technical hire? How do you put someone through a code review if you don't write code, right? Who do you rely on for that type of validation? And for us, we talk about hiring and we say that even if you really know the person well, there usually ends up being a 50% chance that they come in, slot into that existing team, really fit well, and help take you to the next level. It's been one of the things that I've enjoyed least about this job, but you have to be very protective of the culture, the efficiency, and ultimately the output of the team. And so we've had to make decisions to let some folks go over the past year, and they're all for different reasons. And in the case of engineering, there have been some wonderful people who weren't tech fits. Either they didn't understand the stack, or getting back to that whole sort of trust and communication layer, maybe didn't understand how to interpret the business needs and then convert those into the technical and engineering needs. But for us, it again comes down to, on the engineering side, you certainly need to have that technical proficiency, but it comes back a lot to character and how we operate as a team. Our core principle is leadership through transparency. So if we can't have frank discussions about everything that's going on, even things outside of our own swim lanes, if you're not willing to enable and up-level other people on the team, then something's not working right. And I've just found that when everybody is able to communicate freely and people are able to ask those exploratory questions, not only does that sort of serve to produce a conducive team environment, but you really get a sense of who understands what they're talking about. If you can't explain what you're doing, no matter how complicated it is, to a 10-year-old child, then it's going to be difficult to operate in that startup environment when it is just 8 or 10 of us here. And so I'd love to tell you there's some magic 8-ball or some great formula that we've found where if you check these 12 boxes, we know it's going to work. On the engineering side, as we've brought it in-house, it's definitely become easier because we now have a basis and a team that can help evaluate the technical proficiency. But for me, again, it really all comes back to character and that fit on the team, because if we can't work well together, it doesn't really matter what you're bringing to the table. We've all lived in toxic environments and worked in them before. If you're not enjoying the people you work with and you don't want to come to work, you're not doing your best, and the whole thing tends to fall apart pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's all awesome, and I think anybody who's ever tried to do this is nodding their head vigorously. I gotta ask, not looking for the secret sauce here, but I am always curious. What are some of your go-to favorite interview questions to kind of, you explained all that wonderfully, but how do you, learn that during an interview or also during a reference check? Do you have like a go-to favorite one or one or a few that you like?
That's a phenomenal question, and I can be guilty of kind of speaking in generalities. So thanks for checking me on that, Tyler. So the first thing, just in terms of checkboxes, is referrals, right? We've found that if you, and it's a little bit old cliche, but A players bring in A players, and we found that to be completely true. When you find the people who deliver and get what you're doing, trust them and use their network. And when I look at our strongest team members, they've come in from referrals and from the networks of the people who are doing very well here. As far as my favorite interview question, it really depends on the role. We like to understand how people have managed conflict. So one of my favorite questions to ask is, tell me about a challenging scenario. Tell me about how you've handled it. We've heard everything from, we sat down and had a coffee hour and worked through our disputes, to I quit the company crying and later sued them. So you can tell a lot about somebody by, you can tell a lot about somebody by again, how they handle that adversity, because again, not being technical, we'll of course ask them about if they're in sales, tell us about how you manage your pipeline and your quota, and if you're in engineering, we go through the code reviews. But really just trying to get a sense for operating in challenging environments, because there's not a lot of places to hide when you're on a small team.
Yeah, that's a go-to favorite of mine. It's an open-ended question, but some people really go into a great amount of detail, and it can be extremely telling. And similar to your experience, I found sometimes some pretty honest answers where I'm like, that wasn't exactly what I was trying to uncover, but I guess I know this now.
Yeah, honestly, wrongly directed.
Yeah.
Well, it is. We have a saying here that there are no bad people and there are no bad companies, but there are bad fits.
Yeah.
And so we've seen that where, again, for various reasons, someone might not be a fit here. It has nothing to do with who they are as a person. It's just maybe not what we needed at the time or not a great fit for them. I appreciate the transparency, and it tends to lead to, I think, a more productive conversation. But not everybody works everywhere in any organization, but certainly not in a startup where you need to be moving quickly and everyone really needs to be of sort of a singular mindset.
When Tyler and I are interviewing for HireFrame, we try to, we're pretty honest with people about the stage of which our business is in and like where we are in the maturity curve, right? We're still pretty early. And so we've become comfortable explaining like in fully transparently, like, hey, like things at this company, like they break like every 6 months. and that causes a little bit of havoc for a couple of weeks before you regroup, rebuild some systems and that sort of thing. And I know, because we just kind of wrapped up a couple of different interview processes, that is it, we've become comfortable saying that because that actually deters people from joining the company, which ultimately wouldn't have been a good fit. Because we've also, before, when we were less comfortable sharing that openly, we've hired people, they've joined us, and they're like, oh, like, where's my 80-page SOP for how to do my job? We're like,
Right. We're working on it.
we're like,
My
we're
answer
working
is
on
always
that.
we're working on it. Yeah. I go, congratulations, you're
So
gonna write it.
yeah, exactly, exact words. So yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, I think it's you mentioned good fit, and I think timing of where your business is today, where our business is today, is it super important to consider.
Yeah, I mean, especially at startups, everyone's expected to do a little bit of everything. And if you're, again, to the point that no bad companies or people, bad fits, somebody who might not be a fit for us now or might be a fit for us now might not be a fit for us somewhere down the road. But, I look at the things that our head of sales or our COO are doing. These are never things that a head of sales or a COO at a more established company would be doing. But at this point, we hire for that commitment, we hire for that understanding of the role and that kind of energy level, and sort of from that you start to see the product of all these efforts. But this is not a place to come and, to your point, expect to get the 80-page SOP or here's your 9 to 5. We really look for folks who have fluid and high capacity for fluid intelligence, like solving problems and puzzles, and then we tend to just give them an environment where they get to go out and solve them. And again, finding that combination has not been easy. We're very lucky right now to be very much in the groove. But 2023 was our sort of annus horribilis, if you will. And there were plenty of times where we sort of sat back as an exec team and said, are we going to be able to pull ourselves out of this?
Sure.
Because, there plenty that comes with having the resources and the momentum of a larger company where you can take the gas off for a little bit. You can stop to figure things out. There are places to hide. There are places to, sort of figure out what you want to do. And we just don't have that luxury right now to start up. I'm sure same at HireFriend.
Yeah, without a doubt. And Mike
Totally.
and I talk about this.
Yep.
I learned this metaphor at my previous startup that I was an employee at. If you ever heard the dirt road analogy metaphor, I always screw those up. But effectively, right? There's several different stages for a company, and when you're a startup, you first start off. You're not even on the dirt road. You're hacking your way through the jungle, and what it just goes to illustrate is basically somebody who's great for the jungle might not be great for the dirt road or great for the highway. Similarly, someone who's great for the highway, they're terrible at the jungle. You think about, a lot of people, right? They get pretty stressed out in an environment where they don't have that 80-page SOP and sort of the guardrails of all these, metrics and data and all that sort of stuff. Switching gears here a little bit, I do want to kind of say, I obviously know you personally, Ethan, and your story is super interesting to me. I don't mean to kind of put you into a box here, but you are, if I were to put you in a box, you're in an interesting box. We met at Deerfield. You're New York City, born and raised, right? And ultimately, I feel like you kind of followed a path very similar to a lot of other NYC kids that I met at Deerfield, where you went into investment banking and all that jazz. But your life now doesn't really resemble that. You're out living on a farm outside of Atlanta. I'm curious to ask, how one is kind of how did you get here? That might be a long answer. And then two, how much of your own personal kind of personality and where you're at today, how much does that influence your team building as well? Because you're not in San Francisco, you're literally on a farm. So curious about that.
So I'll start with how I got here. I think it's very easy when you look at anyone to draw a linear path. And I could tell a very nice, concise story about how the blocks built on each other. And here I am today.
Yeah.
It's not, of course, what happened to me or anyone else. So I went into investment banking out of undergrad. I was at Merrill Lynch, and this was in 2007, 2008. And all of a sudden, we were all let go, and Merrill Lynch ceased to exist. So I was forced into a bit of a transition. I ended up down in Florida, where I did some sort of middle market M&A and private equity. But as part of that experience, I met a group of younger folks down there who had this business idea, got involved with them a little bit on the side, and realized that I enjoyed the process of building businesses and the day-to-day decisions of figuring out what was working and how to grow that and how to tackle a market much more than I enjoyed, cranking out the same M&A process over and over, especially in an environment where deals weren't getting done. So I'd actually reached out to an old recruiter friend of mine who was based in Atlanta. And I asked if he had anything here. I was not looking to jump back into the finance world in New York. I said, what do you have in Atlanta that would be challenging, that I could leverage some of this finance skill set and be with aggressive folks trying to solve a problem, but in an in-house environment? And he put me in touch with SAP. And so that was really my entry into not just enterprise software, but software and tech and really anything outside of traditional financial services. So fast forward about a decade, and I really enjoyed what I was doing. The challenges were new every day. Now, I am in no way kind of diminishing or discrediting the finance experience. I think everybody's first few jobs or those first 5 years out of college, they give you that framework that you use to evaluate what you do going forward. So if you were trained as a lawyer, a doctor, a banker, an engineer, whatever it is, it gives you that foundation. And so for me, having that finance foundation, I was able to leverage that in a software company. To take really a data-driven approach to things like pricing, like deal desk and deal structuring, like internal operations. And so again, I'd love to tell you that there was kind of a linear path. It was long and circuitous, and really enjoyed that work, which I think helped me be successful in that space in a way that I don't think I would have been if I'd stayed in finance. As far as the farm, that was just a personal desire of mine, and always wanted to kind of get out of the city. To your point, I was, raised and grew up in New York, but always just wanted to be covered in dirt, running around, making a mess. And so I used to look for small properties outside of Atlanta for years when I was sitting here in Georgia. And my wife and I finally found this small farm about an hour and a half south of the city. And this was about 6 months before COVID hit. And so we went from what would have been spending those years in a small rental apartment in Atlanta to walking around the woods, not seeing anybody. And I think to tie that into sort of the entrepreneurial spirit, you're forced to chart your own path when you're out in the woods, when you're not constantly bumping into people, not even the deliberate things like advertising and marketing and all the screens, but just that engagement that you have walking around the city. When you don't have that, your sort of thought process, in my mind, is a lot more expansive. You're kind of forced to decide what you want to think about, where you want to take risks, what you're interested in, and you have to generate a lot of that on your own. And so for anybody who is kind of relentlessly curious and a little bit ADD, I can't recommend farm life enough. I spend my weeks up here in the city in sort of unglamorous corporate environment, and then the weekends are down again, just covered in mud and dirt, learning about everything I can. And in a lot of ways, it's very similar to the startup thing, right? You have this kind of open expanse in front of you. There are suggested guidelines about how you should approach things, but really what you want to do is kind of up to you. And you learn quickly that there's a reason people do it a certain way. It's easy to get yourself in a lot of trouble. But I think it's been a wonderful pairing to be able to have this structured working environment and then have this sort of unstructured opportunity to go out and really think more philosophically and creatively, if you will.
Yeah, extremely
That
well
might have been a
put.
little bit too deep. I like being out in the farm.
No. I loved it. I found myself imagining myself on your farm there for a second. And no, I can
We'd
appreciate
love to
that.
have you.
Especially, I think there's a lot. I think I love that, drawing that connection with sort of finding your path in the woods. I think about literally, this is nothing close to what you have. This is my LA version of what you do. But we recently, my daughter, we got her like this little gardening kit, like an apron and like a little tiny shovel, whatever it is. So we're making our attempt at growing anything. But I do think there's a lot of connections to what we do here, at Higher Frame or whatever business you're building. You kind of put in like this initial blood and sweat to kind of figure something out and get it started. But then to a certain extent, you kind of, what I can appreciate about nature is that there's there's this other part of your team, which is like literally the nature around you and just natural things that happen. And they kind of you gotta kind of set things up, and then somebody else has to kind of take it the rest of the way to a certain extent, and you're there to kind of guide it along. I feel like there's a lot of startup connections there. But I'm curious, this is a question I often ask myself. Is there any part of you, hindsight's 2020, and you kind of just gave a beautiful explanation for your life and how you're appreciative of this foundation you had before you became a founder. Is there any part of you that wishes that maybe you started earlier? I think about that for being a founder, but I also think about that for being a parent. I'm going to be 40 this year, and I've got 2 extremely young kids, and I feel very tired. So I wonder about doing it earlier. Do you ever think about that?
Yeah, of course. I think actually being down south, to your second point there on starting a family, coming from New York and New England, Tyler, and I guess similarly out in California, a lot of people start their families in their late 30s. When I moved to Atlanta, I was about 30 years old. I think I was the only person of my entire peer group at the company who didn't have one, if not multiple children. And, look, priorities shift as you get older. There's plenty of time even running a startup, and I love what I do, but you start to wonder, why am I doing this? What is the point of all this? And it gets back to, I think, why you do it. And you have to be really unquestionably passionate about what you're doing, because logically it's kind of a hard thing to sell. If nobody leaves an unstable job or unstable employment and goes out and builds something like this. I mean, it takes a lot of experience, and usually the folks that I've found who are good at it are people who've been quite competent in their jobs. And anybody who's thinking about doing this because they think it's going to make them an overnight billionaire, I'd encourage you not to do that, because it's not the way it works.
No.
But of course, I wish I'd started, everything earlier, right? We only have so much time. I'm exhausted as well, Tyler, so I can certainly relate to that. But the flip side is, I have an extra 10 years of life experience. There are things that I was able to do in my 30s that I wouldn't have been able to do with our daughter. There are, it's always a trade-off. I'm thrilled with what we're doing now. I have the professional experience to allow us to be effective at this, and also some of the life experience where I really don't have any regrets. And I get to look forward to going home and being involved in our daughter's life in a way that, I see people in their 20s sometimes getting envious of folks running off and doing things. And I got all my dumb stuff out of the way. Maybe that's a better way of putting it.
No, well put. And then, Mike, I have more parenting questions,
Tyler,
but I want to let you go.
I just had a comment here, because I think it's interesting. Like, I think we're all kind of conditioned to believe that like startup founders or people who start businesses are in their 20s usually, or even 30s. But
right.
Harvard, HBS, they've done studies where the average age of a person that starts a business is actually 45 years old.
Yeah.
And so it's the person who comes from like deep expertise in a field or understanding of a problem and starts a business. It's just, I think what happens is we're all conditioned to believe, like, because the news is more spectacular when it's a young rising star who has that billion-dollar success. But most businesses, especially the successful businesses, they come from founders that are 45 when they start their businesses.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, we've talked about it earlier in the call, but you have to understand your problem. When you talk about establishing product market fit, you spend a lot of time and resources to get an idea to the point where you can even begin to get that indication of interest from the market. And so if you're not going into it with a fairly decent understanding of the problem you're solving, who's willing to pay for you to solve that problem, and how you're going to develop and build the solution to that problem, it compounds the risk in a lot of ways. And so you think about sort of startup, life cycle or death cycle by stages. A lot of those early stage companies that just never get off or get any traction, it's because they don't have that lived experience. They haven't felt the pain. They don't know the buyers. They might have a decent idea, but they don't understand how it fits in the ecosystem. So you mentioned the Y Combinator a bit, Mike, and I couldn't agree more. If I were looking for attributes of people that I thought would be successful in building their businesses, I'd look for people who really understood a problem at the deep level and from the perspective of multiple stakeholders, because that is what I think generates, a lot of the really effective ideas out there. As much as we might like to think we could have come up with something in a dorm room, it certainly wasn't the case for me. I'm not smart enough for that. So I just took all my frustration and bundled it up into something that I think we can help bring to the market and make people's lives a little bit easier.
Yeah, here. I certainly wasn't putting any algorithms on my dorm room window in college. I think I was like writing like insert beer here or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious, just on some family bits here. Your wife also kind
Yeah.
of has a business, right? Would you call it a business organization? She's got essentially a founder, and or is a founder. I don't want to diminish at all. How do
She
you?
is a full-blown
What's that?
founder.
Yes.
A
How do
full-blown
you
founder. Yeah.
full blown founder? How do you two kind of think about that? Because I know that my wife has she's a W-2, and but she's a consultant, and that's pretty demanding in itself. And we have a lot of conversations around balance and how do we make sure that we show up for our daughters and all that. I'm curious how you guys think about that and think about that now and then also 10 years from now.
I think the last part of that's key. It's constantly evolving. Our daughter is 3 months old right now, so
Yeah.
its priority is more about keeping her alive than necessarily being sort of engaged in those meaningful ways. So my wife has something of a similar story. She was an educator here in Atlanta. She was a teacher, and her business is largely focused on the education space and designing a curriculum around how to get not just young people, but also old people discussing and talking productively to each other. It's an art that seems to have sort of fallen by the wayside in the past couple decades. So she took her experience in managing classrooms and interacting with younger people and turned that into something that again has become a very nice standalone business on its own. It was a lot easier before we had to think about juggling the priorities of a child in the house, right? We were both very independent, I think, by nature. And so both enjoyed the challenges of building our own businesses. It's becoming more complex, day by day. You look for help where you can find it. Our families are not based here in Atlanta, so that's certainly challenging to manage, to have some of those extra support resources and networks as we raise our daughter. But you have to start to make sacrifices, whether those are, how much we're willing to allow ourselves to travel, to sell on the road. A lot of it honestly gets back to why we bought the farm. We wanted a place where there were no phones. It was disconnected, non-negotiable family time. It was a place to be together, to learn, to explore, and to enjoy each other's company. And so it's, I guess, if anything, that's a bit of how we've solved it. We had to be very deliberate about setting aside time for each other as husband and wife, and then time to be good parents. And as far as what the next 10 years looks like, Tyler, I don't have the slightest idea. For right now, we're really just holding on and trying to make it work. But it's a very difficult thing to do, to manage your passions, your family,
Right.
and especially when you throw in the fact that you're both following your visions.
Yeah, no, that's a very real answer, and a lot of it resonated. I think the deliberate part is something that I've always struggled with. I hate schedules. I hate planning. So parenting is really hard for
Yeah.
me in many ways. And then also, you mentioned both pursuing your sort of your dreams and your visions. And that's a big trade-off. My wife and I often talk about how important it is to show our daughters that we're trying something, that we are willing to put ourselves out there. We're willing to, be defeated and pick ourselves back up and try and all that sort of stuff. But it comes at a big cost. There's a lot of days when, I just kind of wish I was a 9 to 5. Sometimes I'm like, it would be really great if I could just tell the world I'm offline, but I can't. So that all, yeah, really resonates. Ethan, we like to round things out here with a couple of just remaining questions for you. The first one being, what's next for Vendori, right? So, do you have, I know that you're bootstrapped. I don't know if you have plans for fundraising, if you're looking to make any key hires in the near future. Would love to hear anything or any exciting announcements. The floor is yours.
Yeah, so thanks, Tyler. We're having a blast. We have a shippable product out as of a couple months now. And so for us, it's just about engaging with these early customers, making sure that we are satisfying what they expect from us and continuing to build on the side. So we have about an 18-month engineering roadmap, ultimately culminating with some really cool features that I'm excited to take out, targeted mostly at the enterprise market. But what I would say is we continue to discover that nobody is happy with the way that they are doing these B2B transactions today. That everybody is complaining about the process, the lack of visibility, the data. So we have the benefit of getting on demos where we delight our prospects and certainly our customers as well. And I'm just honestly looking forward to getting Vendori more out in the market and seeing these people realize what we have and understanding the impact that it can have to their day-to-day lives, where they're living in manual spreadsheets and ripping their hair out over bad data and seeing everything come together on one cohesive platform. So for us, it's just continuing to build, continuing to get out in the market, and really looking forward to the next 12 to 18 months here.
Amazing. And who would be your typical?
Love that.
Yeah, who would be your typical like target customer? Because we can at what type of company? Because we can give anybody. I actually do have a lot of friends in enterprise sales. So if I can give a quick infomercial here to basically say, look out for Vendori in a couple months. Who are you looking to chat with?
Much appreciated, Tyler. So we're really focused on B2B technology companies. So it doesn't matter to us whether you're selling hardware or software, how you sell it, what you sell. In fact, some of the more complex product catalogs and offering are really where Vendori shines. But anyone today who is having frustration structuring deals, getting nice quotes and options out to their customers, or just feels like they're spending more of their time living in Excel and Google Sheets and less time thinking about the strategic priorities of how to commercialize the business, those are our ideal customers. And again, where we can really deliver value right off the bat.
Right on. Awesome. And then how can those folks find you? I know that you're doing the classic founder thing. You and I were kind of commiserating about becoming more active on LinkedIn. What's the best way to get in touch with you? Is it email? Are you going to be more active on LinkedIn? Should people hit you up on Twitter, X, whatever it's called? What's your preference?
We've got a bit of platform proliferation, so I try to moderate myself as much as I can. But it's certainly always welcome inbound emails, ethan@vendori.com. We would love for folks to check out our site as well. And then on LinkedIn, we're starting to build much more of an active presence. It reminds me, actually, this whole sort of startup game, it's really about energy management. And we say here that you feel the acceleration, not necessarily the velocity. So for us, it's just continuing to build and release and come out with new exciting things internally or externally. But I think it goes back to the core of something a very wise man once told me about being down in the dumps and how to find that motivation to pick yourself up. And that was go, you little red fire engine.
Oh, hell yeah. That's a callback, everybody. Mike is like, what the hell is that? Mike, I was the student commencement speaker for our graduation. So I was very fortunate. Now, this is not grade merit based. This is student voted because I believe you me would no chance, snowball's chance in hell that I would win something based off of my grades in high school. But Ethan, I have to end it on that. If you're going to quote me, which I was quoting a comedian.
Stuck with me, Tyler. It stuck with me. Yeah.
I love it.
We have to leak. I've seen the commencement speech.
You have.
I don't know if you know
right.
this. So we it was from Paul. Maybe we'll leak it.
I like that. I think there needs to be a what worked on high school graduation speeches coming up next. That's what I would definitely watch.
I appreciate that. You're pulling
it's commencement season
here. Yeah, that probably will see the light of day some point on the internet. But Ethan, this has been awesome. Thanks so much for joining us on Lucky episode number 10 for What Worked. You heard it from the man himself. If you want to message Ethan about anything, it could be checking out Vendori as a potential customer, or if you want to hear about farm life or whatever it is, just connect with him. Also, Atlanta area folks too. I know there's a growing kind of tech entrepreneur scene down there too. But yeah, hit up Ethan. And Ethan, thank you so much for your time. We'll let you get back to building and wandering through the forest and all that good stuff.
Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, Tyler. Always awesome to reconnect with you. Glad we had a chance.
Thank you, sir.
Cool.